Over the past few episodes, we have been exploring some of the Civil War battlefields associated with the Trans-Mississippi Theater. Started off at Wilson's Creek, and in the last episode, we were looking at the western part of the battlefield in Pea Ridge, Arkansas. But there's more to the Battle of Pea Ridge than what we showed in that episode. As a matter of fact, the Confederates called the Battle of Pea Ridge the Battle of Elkhorn Tavern. So today we are going to be taking a look at what happened over on the eastern part of the battlefield at Elkhorn Tavern. Alright, so again, we are at the Pea Ridge battlefield, and just a quick recap from the last episode. We talked about how General Curtis and the Union Army of the Southwest had pushed down into Arkansas following Sterling Price. And in Arkansas, Earl Van Dorn had organized the Army of the West, which consisted of Benjamin McCulloch and Sterling Price's divisions. So the Army of the Southwest is going to be facing the South, attempting to thwart any Confederates who were going to be coming up into Missouri. But what they didn't know is that Earl Van Dorn had had this huge flanking march that had circled them and basically put them in a really, really bad position here at Pea Ridge. So currently we are standing in front of the famous Elkhorn Tavern. Now, during the Civil War, the Elkhorn Tavern was owned and operated by a guy named Jesse Cox, and there would have been a lot of travelers who would have stopped at this place. This was an official stop for the stagecoach. And the Elkhorn Tavern, what made it such a popular stopping place, was its location. So this is where the old Telegraph Road ran. Sometimes it's called the Wire Road. There was a telegraph line that had been installed that ran through here. And when General Curtis and the Union Army made their way into Arkansas, well, they would have traveled down this road. So we're facing north right now. They would have traveled from the north and would have gone off in this direction right here. They are going to form their line of defense along the Little Sugar Creek, which we looked at in the last episode. And basically what they are trying to do is halt any movement from any Confederate troops, those under Earl Van Dorn, from coming up from the south. Now, just between here and that line of defense with those entrenchments would have been the headquarters for General Curtis. And what Curtis didn't know is that, well, Earl Van Dorn had other plans. He wasn't just going to attack straight up from the south. He's going to do a flank march in early March of 1862 in the cold, in the snow, and basically they're going to go all the way around and they are going to come up behind the Union Army. Now, that is going to be a huge problem, because right here around the Elkhorn Tavern was a supply dump for the Union Army. So a lot of their food, a lot of their supplies, a lot of their ammunition was right here. And now it is between them and Earl Van Dorn's army. Now, again, in the last episode, we talked about how Earl Van Dorn has his army split into two wings, one under Benjamin McCulloch, which is coming up behind. They get tied up, off to the east. We talked about that. And in front of us, off to the north, well, that would have been the wing under General Sterling Price. And on the afternoon of the 7th, well, Earl Van Dorn is going to take personal command of Sterling Price's wing, and they are going to start advancing on this position. And sent out to meet the threat is going to be the Union 4th Division commander, a guy by the name of Eugene Carr. Now, coming into this battle, the Union Army under Curtis is already at a disadvantage. For one, they're on home field for the Confederates and for the men from Arkansas who had already lived here. Another thing is they're outnumbered. Earl Van Dorn has around 16,000 men. Curtis with the Union Army has around 10,500. So it was going to be critical for Carr to get up here and secure this high ground to kind of even out the score a little bit. We've moved just to the north of Elkhorn Tavern, and we are currently in the position where the 1st Iowa Artillery Battery would have been located. So you can see these 4 cannon here ahead of us. Well, when Eugene Carr got up here, he placed these cannon right here on this spot, just ahead of us. This is going to kind of drop off. There's a hollow off to our right as well. And this is going to be the direction where Earl Van Dorn and Sterling Price and their Confederates are going to be advancing from. Now, right here, again, this kind of drops off into a hollow and then comes up on another ridge. And if these trees weren't here, well, we could see on that opposite ridge the place where Sterling Price placed 21 artillery pieces to oppose these 4. So you can imagine it got pretty hot in this area on the afternoon of March 7th. As a matter of fact, Eugene Carr is going to ride here, and he's going to be encouraging these artillerymen. And he's going to say, hey, give them hell, boys. He said, don't let them have it their own way. Give them hell. He's later going to be awarded the Medal of Honor for his bravery in this action. For the Confederates, under Earl Van Dorn, you're going to have Mississippians under a guy named Little who are going to be advancing up the road here. Off to their right are going to be some Missourians under a guy by the name of Slack. He's going to be mortally wounded in the fight. Supporting this battery, you're going to have the 9th Iowa Infantry, and off to their left is going to be the 25th Missouri Infantry. So there is going to be some heavy fighting that is going to be taking place as these Union troops are trying to protect their position around the Elkhorn Tavern. Back up here at Elkhorn Tavern now, and as the day wore on for the Union, things were looking a little bit more grim up here. Even though they had the advantage of the high ground, what they simply don't have are numbers. And what's going to end up happening, long story short, is Sterling Price is going to deploy his troops along a broad front, and they're going to start advancing on this position. And eventually, well, Carr is going to have to bend his line back, so we're almost going to have a little bit of a horseshoe shape in the area around the Elkhorn Tavern. And eventually, it's going to get to the point where they just cannot hold anymore, and have to start falling back to their original position off to the south. One thing I've noticed as I've visited some of these trans-Mississippi Civil War battlefields is the lack of monumentation. Okay, it's not like Gettysburg or Vicksburg or anything like that. Very few monuments. As a matter of fact, as far as what I've been able to tell, there are only 2 here at Pea Ridge. One of them is this monument right here. This was placed here in 1887 by Confederate veterans, and it draws attention to some of the Confederate commanders who were killed in the battle. So General James McIntosh, and then if we go over here, Benjamin McCullough, and then over here, General Slack. And then if we continue on up here, well, this monument was placed here in 1889. Now, there were reunions at all of these battlefields, and the 1889 reunion was the first one where both Union and Confederate veterans were in attendance. And this monument here was dedicated during that reunion. There you can see it says on the gray, Major General E. Van Dorn, commander of the Army of the Southwest. And here it says Angel Aloft. And then on the other side, maybe hard to see with the shadow, but it says General S.R. Curtis, Commander of the Army of the Southwest. And right here in the middle, it says a reunited soldiery. So on the left it says the blue, on the right the gray. So there was an era kind of in the late 1800s where there was a push towards, well, even after the Civil War, a push towards reconciliation. And I know people have different opinions about that, but anyway, it's interesting to take a look at these things and look at the ways that soldiers opted to try and be remembered in the years after the war. So at the end of the day on March 7th, the Confederates held Elkhorn Tavern. Earl Van Dorn was up here. As a matter of fact, they had even pushed on to the south. Big problem, though, is they didn't know where their supply wagons were. So this battle is going to continue on to the next day. We're going to take a look at where the final engagement took place. But first we're going to go to the visitor center for the Battle of Pea Ridge and see what they have there. All right, we just got into the museum here at the visitor center, and as you make your way through this complex, well, one of the things that they do is they try and give you an idea of who some of the major players are. Now, these are men that we have already talked about in the past couple episodes. So, of course, here you have General Samuel Curtis, Brigadier General, who was in command of the Army of the Southwest, the Union Army of the Southwest. He had been in West Point in the class of 1831. Was also an Iowa congressman. Okay, here's Franz Sigel. We talked about him at Wilson's Creek. Haven't talked about him as much here at Pea Ridge, but he was also here. He was in command of the 1st and 2nd Divisions for the Union Army. Here's Peter Osterhaus. He had a big role in the fighting that took place early on March 7th over on the western side of the battlefield. Okay, and then Jefferson Davis. No relation to the Confederate President Jefferson Davis. He was in command of the Union 3rd Division. And then if we move over here, well, then they start talking about the Confederate States and the Army of the West, which is being commanded by Earl Van Dorn. And there are going to be 2 wings of that army. Again, this is all kind of a recap, but you got Sterling Price and Benjamin McCullough. These two did not like each other very much, so there's a little bit of a problem, in the high command with the Army of the West. And then in command of the Indian Brigade is going to be this man right here, a guy by the name of Albert Pike. And in command of the 2nd Cherokee Mounted Rifles is this man, Stand Watie, who would go on to become a general in the Confederacy and was going to be the last general to surrender in the Civil War. He was born in Georgia, went out to the Indian Territory during the Indian removal along the Trail of Tears, and then fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War. And of course, any good museum on the Civil War is going to have some Civil War weaponry in it. And early on in the Civil War, maybe even throughout, but especially early on, and especially in the Trans-Mississippi Theater, there was just a hodgepodge of weapons. So there were men who were showing up on the battlefield with old flintlock muskets. Okay, this had a range of about 60 yards. There were men who were showing up with smoothbore muskets. And then by the time the Civil War rolled around, well, some rifled muskets were making their way onto the battlefield. And rather than having the 60-yard range of a flintlock, well, these rifled muskets had a range of about 500 yards. And then they have a few other items here that are connected with Pea Ridge. So here we are looking at the diary of Alva Bevins, who was captain of the 9th Iowa. Okay, so they're going to be doing some fighting around Elkhorn Tavern that we just looked at. Here is his canteen. Oh, wow, that is really cool. Also, his waist belt and cap pouch. Try and get to where we can see it here. We've got some issues with the reflection. And then also have the sword of Andrew Drips, who was also in the 9th Iowa. Oh, now this is really cool. This is a presentation sword that belonged to Brigadier General Samuel Curtis. It says here this is a Model 1850 staff and field officer sword that was purchased and presented to Curtis by the officers of his staff in January 1862 at the beginning of the Pea Ridge campaign. So you see there's some wear on the scabbard. You can see we got something written into it here. Let's see. On the scabbard that reads General Samuel R. Curtis, Commander of the Federal District of Southwestern Missouri, from his officers and staff, January of 1862. Now, it's unknown whether he actually carried this in battle, but given the wear on it, they are saying that it's likely. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, now this is a really cool item, and I'm going to try and catch some different angles to see through the reflection. But what we are looking at is the frock coat of a Lieutenant William Chapman. He was part of the Ohio Light Artillery and was here during the Battle of Pea Ridge. And if you look at his frock coat, let's see if we can get a good focus here, you'll notice maybe that bottom button is missing. Well, that's because he was actually hit with a spent round ball that kind of bruised his hip and knocked that button off. Interesting. Now you'll have to excuse the flicker from the fluorescent light, but man, this is a really neat piece. This is the uniform of General Samuel Curtis that was actually worn here at the Battle of Pea Ridge. Also here they have his silk sash and also the epaulets that would be worn on a dress uniform. Okay, so Samuel Curtis, of course, is going to be one of the figures that is very prominent here at the Battle of Pea Ridge, and they've actually got his coat that he wore here. Yeah, that is amazing. All right, we've moved back out onto the battlefield, and we are standing where the decisive action for the Battle of Pea Ridge took place. On the night of March 7th going into March 8th, well, General Curtis basically got all 4 of his divisions and decided to put all of his chips on this spot right here along the Telegraph Road leading up to Elkhorn Tavern. So he has Carr, and he has Davis, and he has Sigel's 2 divisions. And when dawn broke on March the 8th, the Confederates would have looked west and saw a line of Union troops and artillery a mile long. Now, again, we are standing right next to the Telegraph Road, and if we shift a little bit and face off to the north, well, this is the view that the Union Army would have had on the morning of March 8th. Okay, so if we continue up the Telegraph Road, that's going to take us to Elkhorn Tavern. We've got this high ground here, and on the other side of this field, kind of at the base of this big hill right here, is going to be the Confederate Army under Earl Van Dorn. And all along here, you can almost think of it being like wheel to wheel. If we just follow this out, you can see cannon just going on and on and on. There was an insane assembly of artillery all along this line, and the idea that Curtis has is they are just going to pound the crud out of the Confederates and then break a hole in their line and then exploit that with infantry and drive them off of the battlefield. So there is going to be a 2-hour artillery barrage that is going to precede an infantry assault. The people who were here said that it was like it would be like a roar of thunder. So on average, with all of the artillery that was fired here, you can think of a shot going off like every 1 to 2 seconds for 2 hours straight. And it just pounds the crud out of the Confederate lines. After the 2-hour barrage, about mid-morning, you're going to have Union troops that are going to advance across the field, and it proves to be too much for the Confederates. So this outnumbered Union army ends up being successful in driving a superior force off of the field during the 2-day battle of Pea Ridge. You can almost think of this as being kind of like a Pickett's charge, except successful. Yeah, this is really, really remarkable. So the Battle of Pea Ridge is going to be one of the few battles in the Civil War where you see 2 full armies that are squaring off against one another like this. In other battles, it's like pieces of the army that are fighting each other piecemeal. It's also going to be the first time in the Civil War where we see the practice of an infantry assault that is preceded by a massive artillery bombardment like what we see here. The Battle of Pea Ridge is not only going to secure Missouri for the Union, but also parts of North Arkansas. And this place has been absolutely incredible. I've learned so much here today. If you have a chance to get out to any of our national parks or our national military parks, definitely do it, because man, there is so much to see here. But anyway, that was a little bit on the Battle of Pea Ridge.